Parshat Vaeira has 7 of the makos, 7 of the plagues that the Egyptians were struck with, of the 10 that ultimately allowed HaKadosh Baruch Hu to show his upper hand, that the Egyptians allowed the Jews to leave. I'd like to focus in on the second of the 10 plagues, the Makkah of Svardeya. Source 1, Hashem said to Moshe, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, over the reservoirs, and raise up the frogs over the land of Egypt. Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frog infestation ascended and covered the land of Egypt, and the sorcerers were able to do the same. Paro summoned Moshe and Aaron and said, entreat Hashem that he remove the frogs from me and my people. And Moshe said to Paro, glorify yourself over me, for when should I entreat for you? And he said in Pasuk Vav, for tomorrow, l'machar. He said, as you say, that you will know that there's none like Hashem, your God. So indeed we find that the plague of frogs, and we've spoken about this a few years ago, the serious nefesh of the frogs, the songs of the frog. I want to focus on a different aspect of the frogs today. A few technical questions and then major questions. As Rashi points out in source number 2, when Aaron brings up the Svardeya, the language that's used is the singular, Vatal ha-Svardeya. And Chazal tell us that one big frog came out, and the Egyptians trying to get rid of that frog hit the frog, and then smaller frogs came. And every time they try to hit the frogs in order for them to die, more and more frogs came from them. So it started as one frog and then multiplied into many frogs. So we need to understand what is the significance of this. What do we learn from this? The second specific question is, it's very fascinating that when Paro says, but Makav Dam, Paro doesn't ask that Moshe Rabbeinu David. It stops on its own. This is the first Makkah where we see that Paro is asking Moshe Rabbeinu to intervene, asking Kadosh Baruch Hu to stop the plague. But the fascinating thing is, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, okay, when do you want the plague stopped? Paro says, l'machar, tomorrow. Tomorrow? Why didn't he just say today? It's very fascinating that Moshe Rabbeinu is davening today for the plague to stop tomorrow. What is the significance in that? We need to understand that as well. And obviously, the question we ask every week, it's a question we're already familiar with, is although this plague happened thousands of years ago, every time we learn Torah, every time we read the Parsha, obviously its lessons are applicable l'netzach, for every generation, for every time. What are the lessons that we learn from the frog for our lives? And more generally, I'd like to try to Mirz Hashem touch on as well, is what was the point of the Makkos in general? Why couldn't Kadosh Baruch Hu just have one Makkah, let the Jews go, or who needs a Makkah? Just let the Jews go. Right? Kadosh Baruch Hu's called Yachol, he could do anything. What was the point of the Makkos? So let's start with this last question, and with that background, we'll enter into specifically into the Svardeya, into the frog infestation. There's a very, very beautiful piece in Rav Chaim HaKohen, known as Hal Chavan's Sefer Tal Lechaim. He says in source number 3, Im kein Yitziat Mitzrayim mivatet et hamafach mimatzav shel yerida v'shichachat Hashem l'matzav shel aliyah v'hitkarvut. Yitziat Mitzrayim is a turning point from the distance to Hashem to the closeness to Hashem. And he says the point of Yitziat Mitzrayim was to teach the Mitzrim and Bnei Yisrael al nochachuto v'gadluto, to teach the Egyptians as well as the Jews of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's greatness. The medium to teach this lesson, it wasn't just about freeing the Jew. There's something much more fundamental going on here. It was a basic lesson in being able to recognize the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Makkos afforded this opportunity. The very interesting Zohar in the bracket in 3, which says, Nago Firafo, which is based on a pasuk in Yeshaya Yotet. It was a Nagof, it was an affliction for the Egyptians, and simultaneous to being an affliction for the Egyptians, it was a refuah, it was healing for the Jews. What does this mean? So on the most basic level, every Makkah came to be Zichur Shel HaTeva Hagas. The Makkos came to take that very base nature and be able to transform it into something to recognize that the world is a place of godliness. It's be able to take this world, which seems to be so foreign from the concept of godliness, so distant, and be able to move it to a place where you see the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you see the involvement of Hashem. And